The window rattled so violently that Brooke Mitchell thought the glass might shatter, and she realized with a sinking feeling that she had made a terrible mistake driving up the mountain in this weather. The bed and breakfast loomed ahead through sheets of rain, its Victorian silhouette barely visible against the dark sky. Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the sprawling structure for one brilliant second before plunging it back into shadow. Brooke gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white as she navigated the final turn up the gravel driveway. Her sedan hydroplaned slightly, and her heart lurched into her throat. When she finally pulled under the covered entrance, she sat there for a moment, breathing hard, listening to the rain pound against the roof. This was supposed to be a peaceful weekend retreat, a chance to finish editing the manuscript that had been sitting on her laptop for 3 months. Her publisher had been patient, but even patience had limits, and Brooke needed somewhere without distractions. No roommates asking to borrow things, no coffee shops with chatty baristas, no excuses. Just her, a cozy room, and 70,000 words that needed to be whipped into shape. She grabbed her overnight bag and laptop case, took a deep breath, and ran for the front door. The wind caught her hair immediately, whipping it across her face, and rain soaked through her jacket in seconds. She practically fell through the entrance, gasping and dripping onto the hardwood floor. "Oh my goodness, you poor thing." An older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun hurried toward her, already holding out a towel. She had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and wore a cardigan that looked hand-knitted. "I'm Margaret, the owner. You must be Miss Mitchell. We were so worried when we saw the weather turning." Brooke accepted the towel gratefully, pressing it to her face. "Thank you. I probably should have turned back, but I was already halfway here when it got really bad." "Well, you're safe now, and that's what matters." Margaret helped her out of her soaked jacket, hanging it on a rack near an old-fashioned radiator. "Let me get you some tea. You're shivering." The interior of the bed and breakfast was exactly what Brooke had hoped for. Warm wood paneling, floral wallpaper that somehow worked, antique furniture that looked genuinely loved rather than just decorative. A fire crackled in the sitting room fireplace, and the smell of something baking wafted from what must be the kitchen. "I have you in the Rose room upstairs," Margaret said, bustling toward the kitchen. "Second door on the right. Why don't you go up and change into something dry? I'll bring the tea up in just a moment." Brooke nodded, too cold to argue, and grabbed her bags. The wooden staircase creaked pleasantly under her feet. Upstairs, a hallway stretched in both directions, lined with doors. She found the Rose room easily, the name painted in delicate script on a small plaque. Inside, a 4-poster bed dominated the space, covered in a quilt that looked handmade. Lace curtains framed windows that overlooked what was probably a beautiful garden when it wasn't being destroyed by the storm. She changed quickly into dry jeans and a thick sweater, toweled her hair as best she could, and was just sitting on the edge of the bed when Margaret knocked softly. "Come in." Margaret entered with a tea tray complete with a delicate porcelain pot and matching cup. "Here we are. This should warm you right up." She poured the tea with practiced ease. "I should mention, dear, you have one other guest this weekend. A gentleman checked in about an hour before you arrived. He's in the blue room at the other end of the hall. Very quiet, keeps to himself." "That's fine," Brooke said, accepting the cup. The tea was perfect, hot and fragrant. "To be honest, I'm here to work. I probably won't be very social anyway." "A writer, aren't you? That's what you mentioned when you booked." "Editor, actually, but I'm working on my own book right now." Brooke smiled. "Or trying to anyway." Margaret patted her hand. "Well, you'll have plenty of peace and quiet. Dinner is at 7 in the dining room. Nothing fancy tonight, just pot roast and vegetables." The storm knocked out the power to the main kitchen equipment, but we have a gas stove, thank heavens. After Margaret left, Brooke unpacked her laptop and set it up on the small desk by the window. She tried to focus on the manuscript, but the storm was mesmerizing. Wind howled around the corners of the building, and rain came in waves, sometimes light, sometimes so heavy she couldn't see the trees at the edge of the property. Thunder rolled continuously, like the sky was cracking apart piece by piece. By the time 7 o'clock approached, Brooke's stomach was growling. She'd managed to edit about 10 pages, which wasn't terrible considering the circumstances. She saved her work, changed into a clean shirt, and headed downstairs. The dining room was cozy, with a table set for 6, though only 2 places had been prepared tonight. Candles flickered in glass holders, necessary because the overhead lights were dim. Margaret must have been dealing with power issues. A man sat at the far end of the table, and Brooke stopped in the doorway for just a second, taking him in. He was tall, that much was obvious even though he was seated. Broad shoulders filled out a plain black sweater. Dark hair, slightly messy like he'd been running his hands through it. A strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes were striking, a deep brown that caught the candlelight. "Hi," Brooke said, moving to the other prepared seat. "I'm Brooke." He stood, and she realized she'd been right about the height. Easily over 6 feet, he extended a hand. "Harrison." His grip was firm, warm. His hand dwarfed hers. "Guess we're the only brave souls who didn't check the weather," Brooke said, sitting down, something like that. Harrison sat back down, and Brooke noticed he had a glass of red wine. A bottle sat on the table, about a quarter empty. "Margaret said the storm's supposed to last through tomorrow at least, possibly into Sunday." "Seriously?" Brooke's eyes widened. "I'm supposed to leave Sunday morning." "You and me both." Margaret appeared with a tray, setting down plates of pot roast that smelled incredible. Roasted carrots and potatoes accompanied the meat, and thick gravy covered everything. "Here we are. There's plenty more if you want seconds, and Harrison, dear, make sure to share that wine. I left it for both of you." Harrison had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Of course. Would you like some?" he asked Brooke. "Please." He poured her a glass, and Margaret bustled back to the kitchen. For a few minutes they ate in comfortable silence. The food was exactly what Brooke needed after the stressful drive and cold rain, hearty and warming. "So what brings you up here?" Harrison asked eventually, "besides terrible decision-making about weather?" Brooke laughed. "Work, actually. I'm an editor, but I'm trying to finish my own book. I needed somewhere quiet." "What kind of book?" "Fiction. Contemporary romance, if I'm being specific." She took a sip of wine. It was good, probably expensive. "What about you?" Harrison paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Just needed to get away for a while." There was something in his tone that suggested she shouldn't push, so Brooke didn't. "I can understand that. Sometimes you just need to disappear for a bit." "Exactly." He seemed relieved that she wasn't going to interrogate him. "How long have you been writing?" They fell into easier conversation after that. Brooke told him about her job at a small publishing house in Boston, how she'd been editing other people's words for 5 years, and finally decided to try creating her own story. Harrison listened more than he talked, but he asked good questions. He seemed genuinely interested, which was refreshing. Most people glazed over when she talked about the technical aspects of editing. "What do you do?" Brooke asked eventually, finishing her second glass of wine. The alcohol was making her warm and relaxed. "I work in manufacturing." Harrison's answer was vague. "Family business. It's complicated and probably boring." "Try me." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face. He went from handsome but serious to devastating. "We make industrial equipment, Machinery for factories, that sort of thing. Not exactly dinner conversation. Fair enough. Brooke decided not to push. If he wanted to be mysterious about his job, that was his business. Margaret came back to clear their plates and offer dessert. Apple pie with vanilla ice cream. They both accepted, and by the time they finished, the wine bottle was empty and Brooke felt pleasantly fuzzy around the edges. "I should probably get some work done," she said, standing. The room tilted slightly. Okay, maybe she'd had a bit too much wine. Harrison stood as well. "Are you all right?" "Fine, just not used to drinking on a weeknight." She steadied herself on the back of the chair. "I'm good, really." He didn't look convinced. "Let me at least walk you upstairs." "I can manage stairs, Harrison. Humor me." They climbed the staircase together, Brooke very aware of his presence beside her. He had the kind of solid, grounded energy that made you feel safe. When they reached her door, she turned to face him. "Thank you for dinner." "Well, for the company during dinner. Margaret made the actual dinner." That smile again. "I knew what you meant. Good night, Brooke. Good night." She slipped into her room and leaned against the closed door, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hallway. Then she shook her head at herself. She was here to work, not to develop a crush on a mysterious stranger just because he had nice eyes and broad shoulders. Brooke tried to focus on her manuscript, but her concentration was shot. After reading the same paragraph 5 times without retaining any of it, she gave up and got ready for bed. The storm continued to rage outside. At some point in the night, she woke to the sound of something crashing. Maybe a tree branch falling, or patio furniture being thrown by the wind. She burrowed deeper under the heavy quilt and eventually drifted back to sleep. Morning brought no relief from the weather. If anything, the storm had intensified. When Brooke went downstairs for breakfast, she found Margaret in the kitchen looking worried. "The bridge," Margaret said without preamble. "The main bridge back to town. It's flooded. The sheriff's department called. No one can get in or out until the water goes down. How long will that take? Depends on when the rain stops. Could be a day, could be 3. Margaret wrung her hands. "I'm so sorry, dear. I know you both have places to be. It's not your fault. Acts of nature and all that." Brooke tried to sound more cheerful than she felt. Her publisher was going to kill her. "At least I have my laptop. I can work." Harrison appeared in the doorway, already dressed in jeans and a gray Henley that clung to his chest in a way that should be illegal. His hair was damp, like he'd just showered. "You heard about the bridge?" Margaret asked him. "Just got the alert on my phone." He held up the device. "I'm sure it'll be fine. These things usually resolve quickly." But it didn't resolve quickly. By lunchtime, the news was reporting that several bridges in the area were underwater. The storm had stalled over the mountains, just sitting there and dumping rain. Brooke's phone buzzed with increasingly frantic texts from her publisher, then her roommate, then her mother, who had somehow heard about the storm and was convinced Brooke was going to die. "I'm fine," Brooke typed back for the 5th time. "Just stuck, safe, dry, stop worrying." She was in the sitting room trying to work on her laptop, but the internet kept cutting in and out. Harrison sat in an armchair across from her, his own laptop open, frowning at the screen. "Everything okay?" Brooke asked. He glanced up, and for a second she saw real stress in his eyes. Then he smoothed it away. "Just work problems. Nothing I can do about it from here anyway. Want to talk about it? Not particularly." Then, as if realizing how that sounded, he softened. "But thank you." Margaret brought them lunch on trays. Sandwiches and soup, simple but good. "I'm going to be honest with you both," she said, setting down the trays. "I live in town. I usually go home in the evenings, but with the bridge out, I'm stuck here. The guest rooms are all made up for the week, so I'll take the small room off the kitchen. I just wanted you to know." "Of course," Brooke said. We're all in this together." After Margaret left, Harrison closed his laptop and moved to sit on the couch beside Brooke, keeping a respectful distance. "So, looks like we're going to be seeing a lot of each other for the next few days. Could be worse. You could be terrible company. How do you know I'm not? You haven't tried to tell me about cryptocurrency or your podcast yet, so you're already doing better than most guys." He laughed, a real laugh that made his whole face light up. Fair standard to set. They spent the afternoon together, both trying to work but frequently getting distracted by conversation. Brooke learned that Harrison was from Connecticut, that he liked hiking and terrible action movies, that he'd never been married. He learned that she was the youngest of 3 sisters, that she was terrified of spiders, that she'd once accidentally dyed her hair green in college and had to keep it that way for a month. "I need to see pictures of this," Harrison said. "Absolutely not. Those photos have been destroyed." "I bet your mom has copies. Don't you dare contact my mother." The easy banter surprised Brooke. She hadn't expected to feel so comfortable with someone she'd just met. Usually, she needed time to warm up to people, but Harrison made it effortless. Maybe it was the forced proximity, or maybe it was just him. Dinner that night was chicken casserole, and Margaret opened another bottle of wine. This time, Brooke paced herself better. The 3 of them ate together, Margaret telling stories about the bed and breakfast history. It had been in her family for 3 generations, and she clearly loved the place despite the constant maintenance headaches. "You get a lot of guests?" Harrison asked. "Depends on the season. Summer's busy and fall when the leaves change. Winter can be quiet. Spring's unpredictable because of weather like this." Margaret smiled. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything. I love meeting people from all over, hearing their stories." After dinner, Brooke and Harrison ended up in the sitting room again. The fire was going, and rain continued to drum against the windows. Without discussing it, they'd fallen into a pattern of gravitating toward each other's company. "Tell me about your book," Harrison said, settling into the couch. "What's it about? Are you really interested, or are you just being polite?" "I'm really interested." So Brooke told him. She explained the plot about a woman who inherits her grandmother's bookstore and the man who wants to buy the building. How they clash at first but slowly fall in love as they work together to save the store. She talked about the themes she was trying to explore, about community and change and finding where you belong. "It sounds wonderful," Harrison said when she finished. "When can I read it?" "When it's done." "If it ever gets done." "You'll finish it. You strike me as someone who finishes what she starts." "What makes you say that?" He studied her, and the intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "You drove up a mountain in a storm because you'd committed to this weekend. You're still here trying to work when most people would just give up and watch TV. You're determined. I can see it." Brooke felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You barely know me, maybe, but I'm good at reading people." "Is that part of your mysterious manufacturing job?" He smiled. "Something like that." They stayed up late, talking about everything and nothing. Movies they loved, places they wanted to travel, childhood memories. Harrison told her about growing up in a big house that always felt empty because his parents worked constantly. Brooke told him about family dinners that were chaos with 3 daughters all trying to talk over each other. When Brooke finally went up to bed, it was past midnight. She lay in the dark, listening to the storm, and realized she hadn't thought about her manuscript in hours. All she could think about was the way Harrison's eyes crinkled when he smiled, the deep rumble of his laugh, how safe she felt when he was around. This was dangerous. She was stuck here with a man she barely knew, developing feelings that would go nowhere once they left this place. He'd go back to his life, whatever that was, and she'd go back to hers. This was just a moment out of time, nothing more. But when she fell asleep, she dreamed about him anyway. The next day brought a slight break in the rain. It didn't stop completely, but it lightened to a steady drizzle instead of a deluge. Margaret reported that the bridge was still underwater, though the forecast suggested the storm might finally move on by tomorrow. Brooke woke early and actually managed to get some writing done. She was in a groove, words flowing, when a knock on her door interrupted. "Come in," she called, saving her work. Harrison opened the door, and Brooke's stomach did a little flip. He wore jeans and a blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, showing strong forearms. His hair was slightly damp again, curling a bit at the ends. "Margaret's making pancakes. Thought you might want to come down." Pancakes sound perfect. They ate breakfast together, and then, because the rain had lightened, Harrison suggested they explore the grounds. "I'm going stir-crazy inside," he admitted. "Even with good company." Brooke grabbed her jacket and they ventured outside. The wind had died down, but everything was soaked. Puddles dotted the lawn and branches littered the paths. They walked around the property, Harrison pointing out damaged areas. A gutter had come loose on one side of the house. Several trees had lost major limbs. "Margaret's going to have a lot of cleanup," Brooke observed. "We should help before we leave." "That's sweet of you," he shrugged. "It's the right thing to do." They found a small gazebo at the edge of the garden, miraculously still intact. Inside, a bench wrapped around the interior, and they sat down, looking out at the gray landscape. "Can I ask you something?" Brooke said after a while. "Sure." "Why are you really here?" "You said you needed to get away, but it feels like there's more to it." Harrison was quiet for so long that Brooke thought he might not answer. Then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm the CEO of my family's company, Youngston Manufacturing. You probably haven't heard of it, but we're pretty big in the industrial sector." Brooke tried to keep her expression neutral, though inside she was reeling. CEO. That explained the expensive wine, the way he carried himself with quiet authority. "We're going through a major merger," Harrison continued. "It's been in the works for 2 years. The board wants it, the shareholders want it, everyone wants it, except me." "Why not?" "Because it means laying off 300 people, good people who have been with the company for decades. People with families, mortgages, kids in college." His jaw tightened. "The board says it's necessary for growth, that we'll hire new people eventually, but I know how these things work. Those 300 jobs won't come back." "So what did you do?" "I told the board I needed time to think about it, that I wasn't signing anything until I was sure it was the right decision. They gave me until next week." He looked at Brooke. "I came here to figure out what to do. And then the storm hit, and now I can't even get cell service to check in with my assistant." Brooke reached over and took his hand. It was a bold move, but it felt natural. "That's a lot of weight to carry. My father built that company from nothing. He'd know what to do. But he's been gone for 5 years, and I'm just trying not to destroy everything he created." "You don't strike me as someone who destroys things." "How do you know?" She squeezed his hand. "Because you're worried about 300 people you could easily just think of as numbers on a spreadsheet. Because you care enough to lose sleep over this decision. Because you're here, trying to do the right thing instead of just the easy thing." Harrison turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. The gesture was intimate, and Brooke's heart started hammering. "You're pretty wise for an editor." "I read a lot. It rubs off." They sat there, hands linked, watching the drizzle. The moment felt significant, like they'd crossed some invisible line. This wasn't just two strangers passing time anymore. This was something real. "I'm glad I met you," Harrison said quietly. "Even if it took a natural disaster." "Me too." They walked back to the house slowly, still holding hands. Margaret was in the kitchen when they came in, and her eyes immediately went to their joined hands. She smiled but didn't comment. The rest of the day passed in a comfortable haze. They worked side by side in the sitting room, occasionally reading bits to each other. Brooke shared a paragraph she'd just written, and Harrison gave her honest feedback. He showed her an email he was drafting to his board, trying to find a compromise solution, and she helped him reword sections to be clearer. At one point, Margaret brought tea and cookies, took one look at them sitting close together on the couch, and said, "You two look cozy." "Margaret," Harrison said, but he was smiling. "I'm just saying, sometimes good things come from bad situations." She winked and left them alone. "She's not subtle," Brooke said, "not even a little bit." Harrison set his laptop aside and turned to face her fully, "But she's not wrong either." "About what?" "About this being something good." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering. "I know we just met. I know this situation is temporary, but I can't stop thinking about you." Brooke's breath caught. "Harrison, you can tell me to back off. If I'm reading this wrong, if you're not feeling what I'm feeling, just say so. I'll respect that." "You're not reading it wrong." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I feel it too." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, questioning. Then Brooke's hand came up to cup his jaw, and the kiss deepened. His stubble was rough against her palm. He tasted like the tea they'd been drinking, sweet and warm. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Harrison rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since dinner the first night." "What took you so long?" He laughed and kissed her again. This time it was longer, more confident. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head. Brooke felt like she was melting, all her nerve endings on fire. She'd been kissed before, but never like this. Never with this intensity, this sense of rightness. They spent the evening curled up together on the couch, kissing and talking and kissing some more. Margaret called them for dinner, and they ate quickly, both eager to get back to the privacy of the sitting room. By the time they finally said goodnight, Brooke was dizzy with happiness. "Sleep well," Harrison murmured, kissing her one more time at her bedroom door. "Not likely," Brooke said. "I'll be thinking about you." "Good. I'll be thinking about you too." She floated into her room and collapsed on the bed, touching her lips and smiling like an idiot. This was crazy. This was reckless. This was the best thing that had happened to her in years. The next morning, Brooke woke to sunshine. Actual, honest-to-God sunshine streaming through her windows. She jumped out of bed and looked outside. The sky was clearing, patches of blue showing between dissipating clouds. The storm was over. She should have been relieved. Instead, her heart sank. The storm ending meant the bridge would clear, which meant they could leave, which meant this magical bubble she and Harrison had been living in would pop. When she went downstairs, Harrison was already there, talking to Margaret. He looked up when Brooke entered, and his smile was warm but tinged with the same sadness she felt. "Bridge should be clear by this afternoon," Margaret said. "I just got off the phone with the sheriff's office. Water's already going down." "That's great," Brooke said, trying to sound enthusiastic. After breakfast, she and Harrison went outside to help Margaret with cleanup. They gathered fallen branches, piling them near the tree line. They reattached the loose gutter, Harrison climbing a ladder while Brooke steadied it. They swept debris off the paths and driveway. Working together felt natural. Harrison would look over and catch her eye, and they'd smile at each other like they shared a secret. Which, in a way, they did. By early afternoon, the official word came through. The bridge was open. They could leave. Brooke packed her things slowly, trying to drag out every minute. When she came downstairs with her bags, Harrison was already there, his own luggage by the door. Margaret was hugging him. "You take care of yourself," Margaret was saying, "and don't let those board members push you around. You follow your heart." I will, thank you for everything. Then it was Brooke's turn. Margaret hugged her tight. You're a special girl, don't forget that. I won't. Harrison and Brooke walked out to their cars together. The afternoon sun felt surreal after days of gray. Everything sparkled with residual raindrops. So, Harrison said, stopping at Brooke's car, this is it. Doesn't have to be. Brooke's heart was pounding. I mean, we could exchange numbers. Keep in touch. I'd like that. He pulled out his phone and they swapped information. Brooke, I need to tell you something. The serious tone made her nervous. What? These past few days have been incredible. You're incredible, but my life is complicated right now. The merger, the company, all of it. It's a mess. Brooke felt her stomach drop. You're saying you don't want to see me again? No, I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying I do want to see you again, but I need to figure some things out first. I need to handle this situation with the company. I can't start something with you while I'm in the middle of all that chaos. It wouldn't be fair to you. What if I'm okay with chaos? He smiled sadly and cupped her face in his hands. You deserve better than chaos. You deserve someone who can give you their full attention. Let me sort this out. Give me 2 weeks. Then I'll call you and we can do this right. Dates, getting to know each other without a storm forcing us together. The real thing. Brooke wanted to argue, but she could see the logic. She could also see the stress in his eyes, the weight he was still carrying. 2 weeks. But you better call me Harrison Youngston. I promise. He kissed her, long and deep, pouring everything into it. When he pulled back, both of them had tears in their eyes. 2 weeks, Brooke Mitchell. She got in her car and drove away, watching him disappear in her rearview mirror. The whole way home, she replayed every moment in her head. Every conversation, every touch, every kiss. Had it been real? Or just a product of forced proximity and heightened emotions? Back in Boston, reality crashed down hard. Her publisher was furious about the missed deadline. Her roommate had adopted a cat in her absence without asking. Her mother called every day to make sure she'd really survived the storm. Brooke threw herself into editing work, trying to distract herself. But at night, lying in bed, all she could think about was Harrison. His laugh. The way he listened when she talked. How safe she felt with him. She checked her phone constantly, even though she knew it hadn't been 2 weeks yet. A week passed. Then 10 days. Brooke started to worry. What if he'd changed his mind? What if those days at the bed and breakfast hadn't meant as much to him as they had to her? What if he'd gone back to his life and realized she didn't fit on day 12? She was sitting in a coffee shop trying to work when a news alert popped up on her phone. Youngston Manufacturing cancels major merger. CEO cites company values. Brooke clicked on the article, her heart racing. There was a photo of Harrison in a suit, looking confident and professional. Nothing like the casual, stubbled man she'd met at the bed and breakfast. The article explained that he'd walked away from a deal worth hundreds of millions, choosing instead to invest in new technology that would keep current employees and create new jobs long-term. Industry analysts were calling it risky. Shareholders were nervous. But employee satisfaction at Youngston Manufacturing had apparently skyrocketed. Her phone rang that evening while she was making dinner. Unknown number. She answered anyway. Hello, Brooke. Harrison's voice sent shivers down her spine. I'm sorry I'm 2 days late. It's been insane. I saw the news. You walked away from the merger. I did. Turns out there was a third option no one wanted to consider because it was harder, but it's the right thing and that's what matters. I'm proud of you. Thank you. That means a lot. He paused. I'm in Boston right now. I have a hotel room downtown. Can I see you? Brooke's heart leaped. Yes, absolutely yes. When? How about now? She laughed, looking down at her yoga pants and oversized sweatshirt. I need 20 minutes to make myself presentable. You don't need to do anything. You're beautiful no matter what. But take your 20 minutes. I'll text you the hotel address." Brooke hung up and ran to her room, ignoring her roommate's curious questions. She changed into jeans and a nice sweater, fixed her makeup, did something with her hair that she hoped looked intentional. Her hands were shaking as she called an Uber. The hotel was fancy, all marble and gold fixtures. Brooke gave Harrison's name at the desk, and they directed her to the top floor. She knocked on the door of the suite, and then Harrison was there, and all her nervousness melted away. He looked good. Better than good. He wore dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and his hair was slightly messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. The stubble was back. "Hi," she said. "Hi." He stepped aside to let her in. The suite was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But Brooke only had eyes for him. "I missed you," Harrison said, closing the door. "I know it's only been 2 weeks, but I missed you so much." "I missed you too." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and kissed her. It was different from the kisses at the bed and breakfast, more urgent, like they'd both been starving. Brooke wrapped her arms around his neck, and his hands settled on her waist, pulling her closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harrison said, "I want to do this right. I want to take you on proper dates. I want to introduce you to my friends, meet your family. I want to know everything about you." "I want that too. But I also need you to know what you're getting into." "My life is demanding. The company takes up a lot of my time. There's travel, late nights, constant pressure. It's not easy." "Harrison." Brooke put her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "I'm not afraid of hard work. My life is demanding too, but if we both want this, we'll figure it out." He covered her hand with his. "I do want this. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. You're the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing before I fall asleep." "That's very romantic for a CEO. You bring it out in me." They ordered room service and spent hours talking, making up for the 2 weeks apart. Harrison told her about the board meetings, the arguments with shareholders, the late nights crunching numbers to find an alternative to the merger. Brooke told him about her publisher's reaction to the delayed manuscript, the chaos of returning to regular life, how strange it felt to be back in the city after the quiet of the bed and breakfast. "When can I see you again?" Harrison asked as the night grew late. "When do you want to see me?" "Tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that." Brooke laughed. "I have work, and you have a company to run. Dinner tomorrow then. A proper date. I'll pick you up at 7. It's a date." He walked her down to the lobby and waited with her until her Uber arrived. Before she got in the car, he kissed her one more time. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tomorrow." The next 6 months were a whirlwind. Harrison kept his promise about proper dates. He took her to fancy restaurants where she felt underdressed even in her nicest clothes. They went to art galleries and concerts. They had quiet nights cooking together in his penthouse apartment and watching terrible action movies. He came to her tiny apartment and met her roommate and the unauthorized cat, who immediately loved him. Brooke met his friends, successful people with important jobs who nevertheless treated her warmly once they saw how happy she made Harrison. He met her sisters, who grilled him mercilessly before deciding he was acceptable. Her mother cried and said she'd never seen Brooke so happy. There were challenges. Harrison traveled frequently for work, sometimes for a week at a time. Brooke's deadlines were unpredictable, leading to nights where she was too stressed to be good company. They had their first fight about his tendency to overwork himself, and their second about her habit of not asking for help when she needed it, but they always worked through it. They learned each other's patterns, their moods, their needs. Harrison learned that Brooke needed quiet time to recharge after social events. Brooke learned that Harrison processed stress by going for long runs. They figured out how to give each other space while still being present. 8 months after the storm, Harrison invited Brooke to dinner at a restaurant they'd been to on their third date. She thought it was just another nice evening together. The restaurant was beautiful, candlelit, and intimate. They ordered wine and appetizers, talking about their days like always. Then, as dessert arrived, Harrison reached across the table and took her hand. "Brooke, I need to ask you something." "Okay. Do you remember what I said at the bed and breakfast about my life being complicated?" "Of course. You were right to call me on it." "My life isn't any less complicated now. If anything, it's more demanding. But you know what I realized? It doesn't matter, because complicated is worth it if I get to have you." Brooke's heart started pounding. "Harrison, what are you saying?" He stood up and came around the table. Then, to her shock, he got down on one knee. The restaurant went quiet, other diners noticing what was happening. "I'm saying that I love you. I've loved you since that storm trapped us together, and you made me laugh when all I wanted to do was stress about work. You make me want to be better. You make me believe that I can handle anything as long as you're beside me." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a beautiful diamond ring. "Brooke Mitchell, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, of course yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss as the restaurant erupted in applause. Brooke was laughing and crying at the same time, and Harrison was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "I love you so much," she said against his lips. "I love you too. Always." The wedding was a year later, in the spring when everything was blooming. They got married in the garden of the bed and breakfast where they'd met. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Brooke's sisters were her bridesmaids, and Harrison's best friend from college was his best man. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm with a light breeze. As they exchanged vows, Brooke thought about how strange life was. How a storm and a flooded bridge and a moment of poor planning had led to the best thing that ever happened to her. How sometimes the universe conspired to put you exactly where you needed to be. "I promise to love you through every storm," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "Literal and metaphorical." "I promise to be your calm in the chaos," Brooke replied. "Today and always." When the officiant pronounced them married, Harrison kissed her so thoroughly that her sisters whistled. Everyone laughed, and then they were walking back down the aisle together, husband and wife, ready to start their life. The reception was everything Brooke had dreamed of. Dancing and good food and toasts that made everyone laugh and cry. Her father, who had been skeptical of Harrison at first, gave a speech about how he'd never seen his daughter so happy. Harrison's mother, elegant and poised, welcomed Brooke into the family with genuine warmth. As the evening wound down, Brooke and Harrison snuck away to the gazebo where they'd first held hands. The fairy lights strung around the structure twinkled in the darkness. "Mrs. Youngston," Harrison said, pulling her close. "How does it feel?" "Perfect. Everything feels perfect." She looked up at him, this man who had become her everything. "I can't believe this all started because I didn't check the weather forecast. Best mistake you ever made." "Second best. The best was saying yes when you proposed." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." "I know." They stood there in the gazebo, wrapped in each other's arms as the party continued without them. Above, the stars were bright and clear. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. 2 years later, Brooke published her novel. It became a bestseller, the story of the bookstore and the reluctant developer resonating with readers everywhere. She dedicated it to Harrison, who taught me that the best love stories start with a storm. 3 years after that, they had their first child, a daughter they named Margaret after the woman who had given them sanctuary when they needed it most. The real Margaret cried when they told her and immediately knitted a dozen baby blankets. Harrison scaled back his hours at the company, hiring a co-CEO to share the workload. He wanted to be present for his family, to not repeat the mistakes his own father had made. Youngstown manufacturing continued to thrive, proving that doing the right thing and being successful weren't mutually exclusive. Brooke continued editing and writing, working from home so she could be with their daughter. She published 2 more novels, each one more successful than the last. Critics praised her realistic characters and emotional depth. She always credited Harrison with teaching her what real love looked like. They went back to the bed and breakfast every year on their anniversary. Margaret always had the rose room and blue room ready for them, though they only needed 1 room now. They'd walk the grounds, remembering that first stormy weekend, marveling at how far they'd come. On their 5th anniversary, as they sat in the gazebo watching the sunset, Brooke said, "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if that storm hadn't happened?" "All the time," Harrison admitted. "I'd probably still be miserable, working 90-hour weeks and wondering why nothing felt meaningful. I'd probably still be editing other people's words and dreaming about writing my own. The storm forced us both to stop and reevaluate. It gave us each other." He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her wedding ring. "I'm grateful for every second of it, even the scary driving and the flooded bridge and the power outages. Me too, though I could have done without the part where we had to say goodbye. We found our way back to each other. That's what matters." Brooke leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling completely content. They had a beautiful daughter, fulfilling careers, and a love that had weathered every challenge thrown at them. It was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked. "Happy endings. How sometimes they're not just in books. This isn't an ending, it's just the beginning." He was right. They had decades ahead of them, filled with more children, more successes and failures, more challenges and triumphs. Life would continue to be complicated because that's what life was. But they'd face it together, the way they'd faced everything since that storm. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, they walked back to the bed and breakfast hand in hand. Margaret was waiting on the porch, tea ready, a knowing smile on her face. She'd seen countless guests come and go over the years, but Brooke and Harrison were special. They were her success story, proof that sometimes magic really did happen. That night, lying in the rose room with Harrison's arms around her, Brooke listened to the quiet sounds of the countryside. No storm tonight, just peace. She thought about the manuscript she'd been working on when the storm hit 5 years ago. It was published now, sitting on bookshelves around the world. She'd finished it, just like Harrison had said she would. She'd finished a lot of things, started even more, built a life she loved with a man she adored. All because she'd been brave enough to drive up a mountain in bad weather, stubborn enough to stay, and open enough to fall in love when she least expected it. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Harrison's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, always and forever." Always and forever. It sounded like something from one of her novels, but this was real. This was her life, and it was better than any story she could have written. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees. But inside, they were warm and safe and together. Exactly where they were meant to be. The storm had brought them together, but love had made them stay. And that, Brooke thought as she drifted off to sleep, was the real happy ending. Years continued to pass. Their daughter Margaret grew into a bright, curious child who loved books as much as her mother and had her father's determined spirit. When she was 3, they had a son, Alexander, who was quieter but equally stubborn. The children grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how a storm had trapped them in a bed and breakfast and changed everything. Harrison continued to prove that business success and ethical leadership weren't incompatible. Youngston Manufacturing became a model for other companies, showing that investing in people paid dividends in loyalty and innovation. He was featured in business magazines, asked to speak at conferences. But his favorite moments were the quiet ones at home, reading bedtime stories to his children or cooking dinner with Brooke while they talked about their days. Brooke's career flourished beyond her wildest dreams. She became a best-selling author multiple times over, her novels touching hearts around the world. But she never forgot where she came from, and she spent time mentoring young writers, helping them find their voices. She taught them that the best stories came from real emotions, from understanding what love actually felt like. On their 10th anniversary, they returned to the bed and breakfast with their children. Margaret the Younger was delighted by Margaret the Elder, and Alexander loved exploring the grounds. They stayed in adjoining rooms, the whole family together. One afternoon, while the children napped and Harrison read in the sitting room, Brooke walked out to the gazebo alone. She sat on the same bench where she and Harrison had first held hands, where he'd confided about the merger, where they'd begun to fall in love. She thought about the woman she'd been 10 years ago. Stressed about her deadline, uncertain about her future, lonely in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged. That storm had changed everything. It had forced her to slow down, to be present, to open herself up to possibility. "Thought I'd find you here." Brooke looked up to see Harrison approaching, 2 cups of tea in his hands. He'd gotten older, lines appearing around his eyes, a few gray hairs at his temples. But to her, he was more handsome than ever. "Just reminiscing," she said, accepting the tea. He sat beside her, their shoulders touching. "Good memories. The best." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea and watching their children play in the distance through the window. Margaret was chasing Alexander around the lawn, both of them shrieking with laughter. "Thank you," Harrison said suddenly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me. For seeing past the stressed-out CEO to the person underneath. For building this life with me." Brooke set down her tea and took his face in her hands. "You never have to thank me for that. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done." He kissed her soft and sweet, a kiss that held 10 years of love and commitment. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Should we tell them?" Harrison asked. "Tell who what? The kids? About the new baby?" Brooke's hand went to her stomach, barely showing. "They just found out last week." "You think they're ready?" "Margaret will be thrilled. Alex might need some convincing, but he'll come around." They called the children over, and together, in the place where their love story had begun, they shared the news. Margaret squealed and immediately started planning how she'd help with the baby. Alexander looked skeptical, but agreed it might be okay as long as the baby didn't touch his toys. Older Margaret came out to see what the commotion was about, and when she heard, she cried happy tears and hugged them all. "This place," she said, shaking her head. "It really is magical." That night the whole family had dinner together. The children were in bed early, exhausted from playing all day. Brooke and Harrison returned to their room, to the Rose room where it had all started. "3 kids," Harrison said, pulling her close. "We're really doing this. We really are. Are you scared, terrified, and excited?" "Mostly excited." Brooke laughed and kissed him. "Me too." They made love slowly, carefully, celebrating the new life they'd created and the life they'd built together. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, Brooke felt overwhelmingly grateful for the storm that had brought them together, for every moment since, for the family they were growing, for the love that continued to deepen with each passing year. "I have a confession," Harrison said into the darkness. "What?" "I checked the weather before I came here that weekend. I knew the storm was coming." Brooke sat up, staring at him. What? Why would you drive into a storm? Because I wanted to be somewhere remote where no one could find me, where I could think. The storm was perfect. It meant I'd be truly alone. He pulled her back down, holding her close. Of course, I wasn't alone. You were here, and that turned out to be even more perfect. So you're saying you deliberately put yourself in danger. I'm saying fate works in mysterious ways, and I'm grateful for every decision that led me to you. Brooke couldn't argue with that. She settled back against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Outside, she could hear the distant rumble of thunder. Another storm was rolling in, but this time they were together. They'd weather this storm and everyone that came after. Together, they could handle anything. The baby was born 6 months later, another girl they named Rose, after the room where Brooke had stayed during that fateful weekend. She had Harrison's dark eyes and Brooke's smile. Margaret and Alexander were surprisingly gentle with her, protective already. Life settled into a new rhythm, chaotic but joyful. 3 children meant constant activity, endless laundry, and very little sleep. But it also meant laughter filling the house, tiny hands reaching for them, the pure joy of watching their family grow. Harrison cut back his hours even more, determined not to miss anything. Brooke wrote during nap time and after bedtime, stealing moments when she could. They hired help when they needed it, learning that asking for support wasn't weakness but wisdom. On Rose's first birthday, they had a party in their backyard. Both their families came, plus friends and colleagues. As Brooke watched Harrison with their children, saw the way he lit up when they laughed, she felt her heart might burst from happiness. Her oldest sister came up beside her, holding a glass of wine. "You two make it look easy." "It's not," Brooke admitted. "It's hard work, but it's worth it. I can see that. The way he looks at you after all these years, like you're the only person in the world." Brooke glanced over at Harrison, and as if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met across the yard, and he smiled. That same smile that had made her heart skip the first time she saw it. "Yeah," Brooke said softly. "I'm pretty lucky." That night, after all the guests had left and the children were asleep, Brooke and Harrison collapsed on the couch together. The house was a disaster, paper plates and wrapping paper everywhere. They'd clean it tomorrow. "Successful party," Harrison said, pulling her against him. "Very." Rose seemed to enjoy smashing her cake. "She takes after her mother. I remember you being very enthusiastic about Margaret's pot roast." Brooke laughed and swatted his chest. "I was starving after driving through a storm. Best storm of my life. Mine too." They sat there, comfortable in the silence, exactly where they belonged. The journey from that bed and breakfast to this moment had been filled with challenges and triumphs, tears and laughter, growth and change. But through it all, they'd had each other. And really, Brooke thought, that was all that mattered. Love wasn't about perfect circumstances or ideal timing. It was about finding someone who made you want to be better, who supported your dreams while building their own, who chose you every single day. Harrison had chosen her that day in the storm, and every day since, just as she'd chosen him. "What are you thinking about?" Harrison asked, his fingers running through her hair. "How much I love you, how grateful I am for everything we've built." "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. "Though I'm also thinking we should probably clean up before tomorrow. Or we could leave it and deal with it in the morning. I like that plan better." They went upstairs together, checking on each sleeping child before going to their own room. As Brooke got ready for bed, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. She looked tired, there were bags under her eyes and her hair was a mess, but she also looked happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. This was her life. Not perfect, but real, filled with love and chaos and everything in between. And she wouldn't change a single thing. Except maybe she would have checked the weather forecast that day, just to know what she was getting into. But then again, not knowing had been part of the magic. She'd driven into the storm blind, and it had led her exactly where she needed to be. Sometimes the best things in life happened when you least expected them. When you were brave enough to keep going even when the path ahead was unclear. When you opened your heart to possibility. Brooke climbed into bed beside Harrison, and he immediately pulled her close. This was her favorite part of every day, these quiet moments when it was just the two of them. No matter how chaotic life got, they always had this. "Good night, love," Harrison murmured against her hair. "Good night." She closed her eyes, completely content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The children would wake early, demanding breakfast. There would be meetings and deadlines and 100 little things that needed attention. But they'd face it together, the way they faced everything. The storm had brought them together, but love had made them family. And that, Brooke knew with absolute certainty, was forever. Years would continue to pass. The children would grow up, go to college, build their own lives. Brooke and Harrison would grow old together, their hair graying, their faces wrinkling. But the love between them would remain constant, a steady flame that never dimmed. They'd return to the bed and breakfast every year, even after Margaret passed away and new owners took over. The new owners would hear their story and always give them the Rose Room, honored to host such enduring love. They'd tell their grandchildren about the storm, about how sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the greatest blessings, about how love can strike when you least expect it, in the middle of chaos and uncertainty. And every year when the anniversary of that first meeting came around, Harrison would take Brooke's hand and say, "Best storm of my life." And Brooke would smile and reply, "Mine too, always and forever." Because some love stories start with a chance meeting and fade away. But the best ones, the real ones, they start with a storm and last a lifetime. They grow stronger with every challenge, deeper with every year, more precious with every passing moment. Brooke and Harrison had found that kind of love. The kind worth fighting for, worth building a life around, worth everything. And as they'd learned during those few days trapped together, sometimes the best thing you can do is stop running from the storm and let it lead you exactly where you need to be, home.